Welcome here. We learn about the empire that ruled for 1,000 years, the untold story of Kanem-Bornu. What if I told you there was an African empire that lasted longer than Rome, controlled more trade routes than Venice, and maintained continuous governance for over 1,000 years, yet you've probably never heard of it? This is the story of Kanem-Bornu, the empire that defied every rule of history. While Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages, this Central African superpower was building universities, minting currency, and corresponding with sultans and caliphs across 3 continents. And the reason you don't know about it, that's a story in itself. Act 1. The rise around 700 CE. In the region around Lake Chad, the Kanem Empire was born. According to the Gurgum, the Royal Chronicle, documented by researcher Derschlunga of the University of Bayreuth, the Saifawa dynasty established a kingdom that would endure for over 1,000 years. Let that sink in. 1,000 years. The Roman Empire lasted about 500 years in the West. The British Empire, maybe 300 years, depending on how you count it. Kanem-Bornu, over a millennium of continuous governance. Dr. Bauro Barkendo, a leading historian from the University of Madrid, documented how the empire's first great expansion came under my king Dunama de Blami in the 13th century. This was under some small tribal confederation. This was a sophisticated state with a standing army of over 30,000 cavalry. According to contemporary Arab chronicler Ibn Fertu's accounts from the 16th century, the empire controlled the trans-Saharan trade routes, specifically the central route that connected the Mediterranean coast to the forests of Central Africa. Professor John Lavers of Cambridge, who spent decades researching Bornwan history, documented how they traded in gold, ivory, ostrich feathers, and yes, enslaved people. But here's what most don't know. They also traded in books, salt, horses, and textiles, creating a commercial network that Professor Ronald Cohen of Northwestern University compared to the Silk Road in complexity. By the 11th century, Kanem had converted to Islam under Mahmud, but this wasn't conquest by the sword, it was conversion through trade and scholarship. Dr. Khalid El-Ruhib's research at Harvard shows that Kanem became an Islamic learning center, with scholars traveling from as far as Egypt and Morocco to study there. The crisis and rebirth here is where the story gets extraordinary. In the 14th century, the empire faced its greatest crisis. Civil wars and invasions from the Balala people forced the Saifawa dynasty to abandon Kanem entirely. Any other empire would have collapsed, but not Kanem-Bornu. The dynasty relocated westward to Bornu, regrouped, and rebuilt. Dr. Augustine Hall from the University of Michigan documented archaeological evidence showing how they established a new capital at Ngazargamu around 1470. Within a generation, they had reclaimed their former territories and expanded even further. This is crucial. Despite losing their homeland, changing capitals, and fighting numerous wars, the same dynasty maintained power. Professor Murray Last of University College London calls this one of the most remarkable examples of political continuity in human history. The Saifawa dynasty ruled from roughly 700 CE to 1846 CE, i.e. 1,100 years of the same royal lineage. Under my Idris Aluma, 1571 to 1603, the empire reached its zenith. Turkish historian Khalid Kash documented Idris Aluma's correspondence with the Ottoman Empire. The Kanuri king imported Turkish musketeers and firearms, reorganized his military, and established diplomatic relations from Istanbul to Cairo. Ibn Fertu, who served as Aluma's imam and chronicler, wrote detailed accounts of military campaigns, administrative reforms, and legal codes that Dr. Bauro Barkendo later translated and analyzed. Idris Aluma didn't just conquer, he built. He established a sophisticated mail system across the Sahara, documented by French colonial researcher Louis Brenner. Letters could travel from Bornu to Tripoli in Libya in just weeks. He built brick mosques instead of traditional mud structures. He created permanent military barracks, and most remarkably, according to Professor John Hunwick of Northwestern University, he established one of Africa's first codified legal systems based on Islamic law but adapted to local customs. The empire at its height by the 17th and 18th centuries, Kanem-Bornu was a major player in international politics. British explorer Dixon Denham, who visited in 1823, estimated the capital in Ngazargamu had a population of 200,000, larger than most European cities at the time. His first-hand accounts, later analyzed by Professor Louis Brenner, describe a bustling metropolis with markets, mosques, palace complexes, and organized quarters for different crafts and ethnicities. The empire's economy was sophisticated. Dr. Scott Reese from northern Arizona University documented their currency system. They used cowrie shells as standard currency, creating one of Africa's most stable monetary systems. They had organized tax collection, state granaries for famine relief, and regulated market systems. But what made Kanem-Bornu truly exceptional was its cultural development. The Kanuri people developed their own written script, documented by German linguist Hermann Tourneau. Islamic scholars in Bornu wrote extensively in Arabic. Professor John Hunwick's research identified thousands of manuscripts from the region covering law, theology, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. The empire maintained diplomatic relations across the Islamic world. Letters between Bornu Mays and the Moroccan sultans, Ottoman pashas, and Egyptian rulers have been preserved and studied by Dr. Ghislaine Liddon at UC. These weren't tributary relationships, these were negotiations between equals. When the May sent embassies to Cairo or Istanbul, they were received with full honors. The long decline, but empires don't last forever. By the early 19th century, Kanem-Bornu faced new threats. The Fulani jihads of Usman Dan Fodio targeted Bornu, accusing its rulers of mixing Islam with traditional practices. In 1808, Fulani forces actually conquered and burned Ingas. Again, most empires would have ended there. Sheikh Muhammad al-Kanami, an Islamic scholar and military leader, rallied Bornu forces and drove out the invaders. However, this marked a crucial shift. Real power transferred from the ancient Safawa dynasty to the Kanemi dynasty. Dr. Murray Last's research shows that while the Safawa retained ceremonial roles until 1846, the Kanemis became the true rulers. European explorers began arriving in the 19th century. Heinrich Barth, a German explorer who traveled through Bornu in the 1850s, left detailed accounts that Professor A.D.H. Biver analyzed extensively. Barth described a still-functioning empire with organized government, active trade, and cultural sophistication, but also one under increasing pressure. The final blow came from an unexpected direction. Rabi Az-Zubair, a Sudanese warlord, invaded in 1893 with modern weapons and disciplined troops. He conquered Bornu, ending the Kanem-Bornu Empire after more than 1,000 years. The French colonial forces would later defeat Rabi in 1900, but the empire was gone. Why you've never heard of it, so why isn't Kanem-Bornu as famous as Rome or the Ottomans? Several reasons, according to historians. First, location. The empire's heartland today spans Nigeria, Chad, and Nigerians experiencing conflict and instability that make archaeological work difficult. Dr. Augustine Hall notes that vast areas remain unexplored and undocumented. Second, sources. While Kanem-Bornu had written records, many were lost during centuries of warfare. The Gurgum Chronicle survived, but countless other documents didn't. Professor John Hunwick spent his career tracking down scattered manuscripts across North and West Africa. Third, colonial bias. European colonial scholars in the late 19th and early 20th centuries often dismissed or minimized African achievements. French and British colonial histories focused on their own civilizing missions, not the sophisticated empires they displaced. Fourth, modern borders. The empire's territory is now split between multiple nations, so no single country claims its full legacy. Closing. But here's what we know for certain, based on decades of research by scholars like Baviro Barquindo, John Lavers, Murray Last, and others. Kanem-Bornu lasted over 1,000 years longer than almost any empire in history. It controlled vital trade routes connecting 3 continents. It developed sophisticated government, military, economic, and cultural systems. It corresponded as an equal with the greatest powers of its age, and it left behind a legacy still visible today in the Kanuri people, who number over 10 million across Central Africa. This wasn't a lost civilization waiting to be discovered by Europeans. This was a fully functioning, internationally recognized empire that just happened to be in the wrong place when colonial powers carved up Africa. The Empire of Kanem-Bornu proves that African history isn't about absence, it's about erasure, and it's time we brought it back.